My parents paid for my brother's dream career, but told me to be realistic until they needed me to save the family. The first time my mother told me to be realistic, I was 14 years old, standing barefoot in our kitchen, with a sketchbook pressed against my chest, like it was something fragile enough to bruise. My brother Owen was at the table, talking with both hands the way he always did when he was excited, and my father was actually listening, not just hearing him, listening, leaning in, nodding, smiling that rare, proud smile he wore so easily for Owen and so sparingly for anyone else. Owen wanted to go to a summer program 3 states away. It was for film, directing, editing, camera work, all of it. He had printed out the brochure and left it on the table where the glossy photos could do half the persuading for him. Young people in black t-shirts holding cameras, golden sunlight, serious expressions, future genius in progress. My father picked up the brochure and said it looked impressive. My mother asked what it cost, but she asked it in that soft, performative way that already meant she had decided the answer was survivable. I remember standing there because I had been waiting for what felt like an hour for a gap in the conversation. I had won a regional art competition the week before. The prize was not money. The prize was admission into a pre-college illustration workshop in Chicago. I needed travel, materials, and the program fee. I had rehearsed how to ask so many times that the words had gone flat inside me. When Owen finally paused long enough to breathe, I stepped forward and said I had something too. My mother looked at me. "Something what?" "A program," I said. "For illustration. I got in." My father nodded once, distracted. "That's nice." I said the fee. I said the dates. I said it was selective. I said one of my teachers told me it could help me build a portfolio if I wanted to apply to art schools later. That was when my mother smiled at me with that careful, almost tender disappointment she used whenever she wanted to sound loving while closing a door. "Charlotte," she said, "art is wonderful, but you need to be realistic." My brother got his summer program. I got a new set of kitchen towels to fold because company was coming that weekend. That was the shape of our family for as long as I can remember. Owen was the bright possibility. I was the practical backup. He was encouraged to dream. I was praised for understanding limits. He was an investment. I was a convenience. The frustrating thing was that no one ever said it in a way other people could easily condemn. There was no dramatic cruelty, no screaming, no slammed doors, just 1,000 tiny decisions, each one defensible on its own, each one adding up to a life where one child was cultivated and the other was cautioned. If Owen wanted a tutor, he got one. If I wanted extra classes, I was told the public library was free. If Owen stayed out late because he was networking, he was ambitious. If I stayed up late working, I was too intense and needed balance. If Owen changed majors twice in college, he was finding himself. If I chose accounting because it came with scholarship money and a clear path to a job, I was sensible. My mother loved that word for me. Sensible. As if my entire personality had been sanded down into something useful and low maintenance. What nobody acknowledged, at least not out loud, was that sensible is often just another word for a child who learned early that asking cost too much. My name is Charlotte, and I was the daughter my parents trusted to survive disappointment quietly. That trust, as it turned out, would become the most expensive mistake they ever made. By the time I was 32, Owen lived in Los Angeles and had the kind of life my mother described to neighbors with strategic vagueness. He was in development, or working with creative people, or attached to a few projects. The language shifted depending on how much status she needed from the conversation. From what I could tell, he had spent most of his 20s moving between short-term contracts, borrowed apartments, unpaid opportunities, and dramatic declarations about being on the edge of something big. He had talent, I think. I say that fairly. He had charm, too, which can carry a person a surprisingly long way. But he also had a lifelong confidence that the ground would appear beneath him because it always had. Meanwhile, I lived in Hartford in a one-bedroom apartment with creaky floors, an overwatered fern I kept trying to redeem, and a job at a mid-sized logistics company where I had quietly become indispensable. I was the senior financial analyst who knew where every odd entry came from, which vendor always invoiced wrong, and which manager needed numbers translated into plain English before he stopped panicking. It was not glamorous. It was not anyone's movie-worthy dream, but it was mine in the way that stability becomes yours after you build it brick by brick with your own exhausted hands. I liked balancing messy systems into clean ones. I liked solving problems that other people found dull. I liked the dignity of competence. I liked that when I paid my rent, nobody had to rescue me. When my car needed brakes, I handled it. When my wisdom tooth started throbbing on a Tuesday, I booked the appointment, arranged the time off, and dealt with it. I did not talk about these things the way Owen talked about his projects, because there is no applause for ordinary reliability. Still, I was proud of my life, even if I had learned not to perform that pride too loudly around my family. On Sundays, my mother called. She always started with the weather, then moved into neighborhood news, then Owen, as naturally as if his name were the center bead of every conversational rosary she ever fingered. Owen had a meeting with a producer, she said one Sunday in early April, while I stood in my kitchen peeling an orange over the sink. That sounds good, I said. He says this one could really lead somewhere. I hope it does. And he's thinking of partnering with a friend on an independent project. I separated the orange into neat sections and said, "That's great." Then there was the pause I knew so well, the one where she remembered I existed as an independent plotline. "And how are things there?" "Good," I said. "Busy. We're closing out quarter end." "That sounds stressful." "It is, a little." "Well," she said brightly, "at least your field is steady." That was another one of her gifts, the ability to diminish you in the exact shape of a compliment. At least your field is steady. At least you've always had a good head on your shoulders. At least you understand how the real world works. At least. At least. At least. Sometimes I wondered who I might have become if anyone had ever looked at me and said more than at least. That spring, my father began calling too, which was unusual enough to put a quiet pressure in my chest before I even answered. He was not a man who called for conversation. He called with purpose, or not at all. The first time, he asked a few questions about taxes. The second time, he wanted to know whether I thought interest rates would drop. The third time, he casually mentioned that business had been a little uneven. My parents owned a regional home decor store called Wren and Finch. Calling it a store was technically true, but incomplete. It had once been 3 stores, then 2, then 1 flagship location, with a robust online shop and a warehouse operation in the back. For years, it had done well enough to fund their lives, Owen's drifting ambitions, and the image of security my mother considered almost morally important. Wren and Finch was her pride and my father's identity. She curated displays and social media photos in silk blouses and expensive boots. He handled suppliers, margins, hiring, expansions, and the sort of old-school business posturing that confused intimidation with leadership. Together, they had built something respectable, not enormous, not flashy, but known. As children, Owen and I used to spend Saturdays there. Owen got bored and wandered. I reorganized ribbon drawers and learned inventory codes before I was old enough to drive. I understood the bones of that business better than my parents knew, not because they taught me, because I paid attention. When my father said things were uneven, something in me sharpened. "What does uneven mean?" I asked. "A slow season," he said. "It's April." So? So you don't call your accountant daughter to chat about interest rates during a slow season unless something's off. He chuckled, but it was not a relaxed sound. "You always were suspicious." "No," I said, "just realistic." I do not know if he heard the echo in that. If he did, he ignored it. "Your mother worries too much," he said. "We've had a few supply issues, Online sales dipped. It'll correct. Have you looked at cash flow? A pause. Dad, we're fine. That phrase, in my experience, usually meant the opposite. For the next few weeks, I thought about it more than I wanted to. Numbers have a way of haunting you when you know where trouble likes to hide. I imagined unsold inventory, rising shipping costs, credit lines stretched thin, bad forecasting. I imagined my father waving away data in favor of instinct, and my mother continuing to order pieces because they photographed beautifully, regardless of turnover rates. I also imagined Owen knowing absolutely none of this while telling someone over cocktails that entrepreneurship ran in his blood. Then, one Thursday in May, I got the call that changed the temperature of everything. I was still at the office. Most of the floor had emptied out, leaving behind the hum of fluorescent lights and the tapping of one distant keyboard. My computer screen glowed with a reconciliation report I had been staring at too long. My mother's name lit up on my phone. I answered and immediately knew something was wrong, because she did not bother with her usual opening. "Charlotte," she said, and her voice was thin in a way I had only heard twice before. Once when her own mother died, and once when Owen crashed a borrowed motorcycle at 23 and they had to fly to California. "Yes? We need you to come home this weekend." I leaned back slowly in my chair. "What happened?" "It's your father." My mind moved to hospitals, strokes, heart attacks, falls, all the ordinary horrors. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. Physically, it's the store." I closed my eyes. "What about it?" There was a silence so full I could hear her breathing through it. "We may have a problem." I let out one laugh before I could stop myself. Not a cruel one, just the involuntary sound a body makes when something you suspected becomes real and absurd all at once. "A problem," I repeated. "Charlotte, please." "What kind of problem? Can you just come?" My office chair creaked as I leaned forward again. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see my reflection faintly over the city lights outside. Tired eyes, hair twisted up with a pencil. The face of a woman who had spent half her life being the emergency contact for people who never listed her first. "No," I said quietly. "Tell me now." She inhaled sharply. "There are loans." "How many?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "Your father handled that side." "Then put him on. He doesn't want to talk right now." Of course he did not. "What kind of loans?" I asked. "Operating loans, I think, and a line of credit. Maybe two." My stomach tightened. "How far behind are you?" "I'm not sure." "How are you not sure?" "Charlotte, I need you to stop talking to me like I'm one of your employees." The old instinct rose in me then, the one that wanted to apologize simply for being clearer than the people around me. I swallowed it down. "I'm talking to you like someone who is trying to understand what disaster I'm walking into." Her voice broke. "Please come." That was the thing about family. Even when love had been uneven, obligation had a way of arriving dressed as urgency. Even when resentment was justified, concern still moved first. My mother knew that. Perhaps not consciously, but she knew. I drove down Saturday morning beneath a low gray sky that made the highway look flatter and longer than usual. The trees had just started turning fully green. Gas stations flickered past. Rest stops. Trucks hauling anonymous freight. I drank bad coffee from a paper cup and kept telling myself I was only going to assess the situation. Just look. Just understand. No promises. No miracles. Still, the closer I got to Maple Glen, the smaller I felt. It is a strange thing to return to a town where people remember versions of you that no longer fit. The good student, the quiet daughter, the responsible one, the girl who never made a scene, the girl who would help stack chairs after the fundraiser while her brother charmed donors and vanished before cleanup. The house looked exactly the same. White siding, blue shutters, azaleas blooming too aggressively along the walk. My mother always kept the front steps spotless, as if tidiness itself could hold chaos at bay. When I walked in, the smell hit me first. Lemon polish and coffee, familiar enough to make something ache. My mother was in the kitchen, still in her robe, even though it was nearly 11. That alone told me more than her voice had. She was never in her robe past 8, unless the world had slipped badly off its rails. She turned when she heard me and pulled me into a hug. It was tighter than usual, not theatrical, truly frightened. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I stepped back and looked at her. She seemed smaller somehow, her lipstick gone, her hair unstyled, her face stripped of its usual confidence. "Where's Dad?" "In the den." "And Owen?" She hesitated. "He's flying in tonight." I stared at her. "He's what?" "He wanted to be here." I laughed again, this time with less surprise and more fatigue. "Of course he did." "Charlotte." "No, that's actually perfect. Why handle a crisis without the family visionary?" "That's unfair." I set my bag down by the table. "Is it?" Her eyes flashed, and for a second I saw the woman I knew best, the one who could confuse discomfort with disrespect. "You don't need to make this harder than it already is," she said. I looked around the kitchen, where I had once done algebra homework, while listening to my parents discuss how to refinance a supplier contract, where I had packed my own lunches while Owen slept in before theater camp, where I had stood with a sketchbook and been told to be realistic. "I'm not the one who made it hard," I said. "I'm the one you call when hard shows up." She looked away first. My father was in the den, with papers spread across the coffee table in chaotic stacks, as if disorder itself might conceal the shape of the truth. He had always hated being seen in uncertainty. Even now, with his reading glasses low on his nose and his jaw rough with unshaven gray, he carried himself like a man who expected deference by habit. When he saw me, he stood too fast and knocked a folder sideways. "Charlotte." "Dad?" We did not hug. He gestured to the papers. "I was just organizing everything." No, he had not been. He had been drowning in it. I stepped closer. Bank statements, vendor balances, tax notices, merchant processing reports, loan agreements, a yellow envelope from a law firm, a final notice from their landlord regarding a lease covenant. Every nerve in me went cold and precise. "How long has it been this bad?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "It looks worse laid out." "Answer the question." "A year, maybe." I looked up so sharply he flinched. "A year?" "We had some setbacks." "What kind of setbacks?" He started listing them in fragments: freight surcharges, website issues after a platform migration, holiday inventory that arrived late and sold below forecast, a seasonal manager who left abruptly, shrinking margins, a loan taken to smooth payroll, another to bridge vendor payments, online returns that spiked, sales tax filing confusion, personal guarantees signed because the bank needed reassurance, minimum payments made with borrowed money, deferred maintenance, cash advances. Each one was survivable alone. Together, they were a collapse in slow motion. "You borrowed against the house," I said, because I had just seen the paperwork. He did not answer. "You borrowed against the house?" "We needed liquidity." "You put your house up for liquidity." "It was temporary." "No," I said. "Temporary is a weather delay. This is structural." His face hardened then, because underneath fear was pride, and pride was the language he spoke most fluently. "I didn't ask you here to lecture me." I held his gaze. "Then why did you ask me here?" For a moment neither of us moved. From the hallway, I could hear my mother rinsing cups in the sink. Water, ceramic. The domestic soundtrack of people pretending not to listen. Finally, my father sat back down heavily and said, "I need to know if it can be saved." There it was. Not "hello, daughter," not "I'm sorry," not "we should have trusted your judgment years ago when you offered to help digitize our inventory, and I told you not to bring corporate thinking into a family business." Just, "can it be saved?" I sat across from him and began sorting papers into categories: debt, operating liabilities, taxes, payroll, lease obligations, vendor exposure, personal assets. His eyes followed my hands. "You always were good at this," he said. The compliment landed with a strange weight. Too late to heal, too familiar to matter. Still, some smaller, younger part of me noticed it the way a neglected plant notices rain, even after deciding not to trust the sky. I hated that. I really did. By noon, I knew 3 things for certain. First, the business was in worse shape than my mother understood, and worse shape than my father had admitted, even to himself. Second, they had not brought me in early, because they still believed they could fix it without acknowledging they needed the daughter they had spent years underestimating. Third, if nothing changed immediately, they would lose the store, the house, and whatever remained of their reputation in town. My father watched me make notes in a yellow legal pad. "Well?" he asked. I set the pen down. "Well," I said, "you don't have a bad quarter. You have a triage situation." He exhaled through his nose. "Can it be saved?" I looked at the paper again before answering, because numbers deserve honesty. "Maybe," I said, "but not by pretending." He leaned back and folded his arms. "What does that mean?" "It means no more vague language, no more image management, no more talking about the store like it's fundamentally healthy when it's bleeding from 6 places." My mother had come to the doorway without me noticing. She stood there gripping a dish towel. I continued, "If you want me to help, I need everything. Every login, every account, every debt, every vendor agreement, every tax notice, every contract, every payroll schedule. Not most of it. All of it." My father's mouth tightened. "And if there's anything else you haven't told me," I said, "now is the time." Neither of them spoke. The silence dragged long enough to become its own answer. "What else?" I asked. My mother took a breath. "Your father took money from your grandmother's trust." I turned slowly toward her. The room changed shape around me. "My grandmother's trust," I repeated. "It was an advance," my father said quickly, "against what would eventually be ours." I stared at him. That trust had been set up years before, mostly symbolic by wealthy standards, but meaningful by ours. My grandmother, who believed in quiet fairness, had divided it equally between future grandchildren and designated portions for education, emergencies, and long-term support. It was not a fortune, but it was deliberate, sacred even. "She left that for both of us," I said. "It was family money," he snapped, defensive now that the truth was in the room. "No, it was designated family money, which is different. We were going to replace it." "Did Owen know?" My mother looked down. Of course he did not. Or perhaps he did and had already folded it into his understanding of the world. Resources exist, and somehow they arrive. I stood and walked to the window, because if I stayed still, anger might turn me reckless, and reckless anger is rarely useful. Outside, the neighbor's dog trotted along the fence line with an absurdly cheerful bounce. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started. It was one of those ordinary suburban afternoons that make catastrophe feel almost insulting in its intimacy. When I turned back, my voice was steady again. "How much is left?" My father said the number. It was enough to make my jaw clench. "Okay," I said. My mother blinked. "Okay." "Okay means I heard you." I sat down again and wrote another line on the legal pad. Personal breach. Possible restitution. My father frowned. "What is that?" "That," I said, "is me resisting the urge to say what I actually think." His face darkened, but before he could answer, the front door opened. We all froze. A familiar voice called from the hall, warm and easy and entirely unsuited to the room. "Mom? Dad? Charlie?" Only Owen called me Charlie anymore, as if preserved affection excused neglect. He came into the den a moment later, wearing airport casual that had probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Soft gray hoodie, expensive sneakers, sunglasses still on his head. He looked tanned, tired, and handsome, in the careless way that had opened doors for him his whole life. He also looked confused by the tension, which meant no one had told him the full story before summoning him across the country. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, sis!" I looked at him. Really looked. The favored son, the funded dreamer, the family myth in human form. And all I could think was this. For years, they had paid for his becoming while asking me to accept my limits. Now the limits had arrived for all of us, and they had called me. If you want, I'll continue this female-narrated sleep story and carry the full fallout through the business crisis, the family betrayal, and the moment they realize exactly who they underestimated. And if you're enjoying Bedtime Threads, please like and subscribe. Owen's smile faded first at my face, then at the papers on the table, then at the expressions of our parents, and finally at the legal pad in front of me. "What happened?" he asked. No one answered immediately. My mother dabbed at the corner of her mouth with the dish towel. My father stared at the floor, as if he could dominate it into offering him a better version of events. I said nothing because I had already spent the morning dragging truth into the room, and if there was one person who should hear it directly from the people who had protected him from consequences for most of his life, it was Owen. He looked at my mother. "Mom?" Her voice came out unsteady. "The store is having some difficulties." I almost smiled at that. Difficulties. As if the building had a leaky faucet, not a financial knife in its ribs. Owen shifted his weight. "What kind of difficulties?" My father lifted his chin, trying to retrieve some authority from the wreckage. "Cash flow, vendor pressure, nothing that can't be corrected." I said, "That's not true." All three of them looked at me. Owen blinked. "Charlie." "It's not true," I repeated. "You're looking at debt exposure, tax issues, vendor defaults, lease risk, and a house that's tied up in business borrowing." He stared at me for a second, then at our father. "Is that right?" My father's silence was answer enough. Owen slowly took off his hoodie and draped it over the back of a chair, suddenly less like a traveler dropping in and more like someone realizing he had entered the wrong movie halfway through and needed to learn the plot fast. "How bad is it?" he asked. I almost said, "How honest do you want the answer?" But I was too tired already for cruelty that did not solve anything. "Bad enough that if nothing changes now," I said, "you could lose the store and the house." The room went very still. Owen looked from me to our parents again, searching for contradiction and finding none. How did this happen? That question would have required more than one answer. It would have required years. It happened in every moment my father chose instinct over analysis, because admitting he needed guidance felt weak. It happened every time my mother prioritized presentation over correction, because appearances were easier to maintain than reality. It happened in every family system where one person was trained to dream without limits, while another was trained to manage everyone else's consequences. Instead, I said, the short version is that they kept borrowing to patch operating problems and then kept hiding how serious it was. Owen ran a hand over his face. "Jesus!" My father straightened. "Watch your tone." That almost did make me laugh. Owen looked at him in disbelief. "My tone?" "Enough," my mother said quickly. There are moments when a family's usual choreography breaks down so completely that everyone stands exposed without their assigned role. This was one of them. My father could not command his way out. My mother could not soften it into something polite. Owen could not charm it, and I could not fix it simply by understanding it. That last part was the one no one else seemed ready to accept. Owen sat on the arm of the sofa and stared at the paperwork. "Okay," he said finally. "So what do we do?" The use of "we" landed strangely. Not unwelcome, just unfamiliar in a crisis. Owen's natural language had always been "I," with family operating as a supportive chorus in the background. I folded my hands over the legal pad. "First," I said, "I need to go through everything without anyone withholding anything else." My father bristled. We've told you what matters." "No," I said. "You've told me enough to alarm me. That's different." Owen said, "Dad, just let her do it." That surprised all of us, including perhaps himself. My father turned toward him. "You just got here." "Exactly. And even I can tell this is bigger than you're saying." My father hated that. Hated being read. Hated that his son, the one he always believed reflected him best, had recognized weakness in him so quickly. He looked at me again, as if the betrayal had somehow originated in my competence. "Fine," he said. "Go through it." What followed was 6 hours of excavation. I worked at the dining room table because it had the largest surface and the best light. My mother made coffee she did not drink. My father hovered and tried to answer questions with partial recollections. Owen sat beside me longer than I expected, opening envelopes, logging account numbers, reading dates aloud, and looking increasingly sick. I learned that my father had signed a merchant cash advance at a rate so predatory I had to close my eyes for a second before speaking. He had delayed payroll taxes twice. He had maxed out 2 business cards and 1 personal card. He had been paying key vendors just enough to keep shipments moving while letting smaller ones rot. He had overordered seasonal inventory because my mother insisted the online shop needed to feel abundant. The warehouse software had not been reconciled properly in 9 months. Returns were being processed without a functional restocking system. The website ad spend had increased even while conversion rates dropped. They had no rolling 13-week cash forecast, no serious margin analysis by category, and no coherent plan beyond surviving 1 week at a time. And then there was the trust. Even after the shock of hearing about it, seeing it on paper made it feel uglier. 2 distributions taken early under the justification of family need. 1 transferred into the business. 1 used partly for the business, and partly, I discovered from a line item and an email receipt, to cover Owen's rent during a year he had not told any of us he was behind. I stared at that receipt until the numbers blurred. Owen was unpacking a folder across from me when he noticed I had gone still. "What?" he asked. I slid the paper toward him without a word. He read it once, then again, more slowly. The color drained from his face. "I didn't know where that came from," he said. My mother, who was placing crackers and cheese on a plate no one had asked for, froze where she stood. I looked at her. "You told him it was from the trust?" Her lips parted. "He was in trouble." I turned to Owen. "Did you ask?" "No," he said, still staring at the page. "I asked Dad if he could help me cover a few months. He said he'd figured something out." I believed him. Or rather, I believed that he had not asked enough questions because he had never been trained to. "That money was for both of us," I said. Owen lifted his eyes to mine. "I know." No defense, no excuse, just those 2 words, bare and late. Something flickered in me then, and I hated that too. It would have been easier if he were smug. Easier if he dismissed it. Easier if he were exactly the caricature my resentment sometimes made of him. But he looked ashamed, and shame complicates anger. My father spoke from the doorway. "This isn't the time to get emotional about ancient history." I turned so sharply, my chair legs scraped the floor. "Ancient history," his jaw set. "I did what I had to do for this family." "No," I said. "You did what you wanted, and then called it family, because you expected the word to protect you." The room went quiet. My mother said my name in warning, but I kept going because once truth starts moving, stopping it can feel like suffocation. You paid for Owen's programs, his moves, his opportunities, his emergencies. You took from a trust that belonged to both of us. And all those years, every time I wanted something, you told me to be realistic. My father's face hardened. "That has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this." "Charlotte," my mother said, "please." "No," I said, not loudly, just with the kind of calm that comes after years of practice. "You don't get to ask me to save the family and then tell me the family history is irrelevant. Owen looked between us like someone watching two versions of a language he should already know collide in front of him. My father spread his hands. You want gratitude? Fine. You were always responsible. We trusted you to land on your feet. The sentence sat there for a moment, and then I realized with a hollow kind of wonder that he thought that explained everything. Trusted you to land on your feet. As if abandonment became admirable when phrased as confidence. As children, I said quietly, you're not supposed to test one kid's resilience by feeding the other one's ambition. My mother sank slowly into a chair. She looked tired enough to break. Owen stood up. Did you really tell yourself that? He asked our father. That she was just fine? My father looked blindsided by the question. She was fine. I laughed once. Yes, because I made sure I was. He had no answer to that. That night, no one slept well. I stayed in my old room because the guest room was full of unopened store boxes my mother had clearly meant to sort months ago and never did. The room looked smaller than it had when I was 17. The same pale walls, the same slanted ceiling, the same closet door that never shut properly. My mother had turned it into a kind of nostalgia museum. A few framed photos, a quilt at the foot of the bed, a shelf with old debate trophies, and one ceramic bowl I made in 10th grade, glazed a muddy blue. There were no drawings, no sketchbooks, no evidence of the parts of me that had not been practical enough to keep. I sat on the bed with my laptop open, building the first ugly outline of what it would take to stabilize the business. Emergency cash mapping, debt prioritization, payroll schedule, negotiation sequence, inventory liquidation possibilities, tax exposure review, lease conversations, asset protection, personal boundary conditions. I wrote the last category because without it, the rest would destroy me. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on the door. Come in, I said. Owen leaned against the frame. He had changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, and without the polished arrival version of himself, he looked suddenly younger. Not like a child exactly. More like the brother I remembered in rare unguarded moments. The one who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms and pretend he was only there because he wanted to borrow a flashlight. Can't sleep? He asked. I almost told him to go away, but I was too tired to armor myself efficiently. No. He stepped in and shut the door behind him. Can I sit? I gestured to the desk chair. He sat, elbows on knees, hands clasped loosely. For a while, neither of us spoke. The house made its familiar night sounds around us. Pipes settling, refrigerator humming faintly downstairs, wind tapping a branch somewhere near the window. Finally, he said, I didn't know about the trust. I know. He nodded, relieved and not relieved. I really didn't. I know. He swallowed. I probably should have asked more questions. I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. Probably. He accepted that too. After a minute, he said, Did they? Really say that to you a lot? Be realistic? I leaned back against the headboard. You were there. Not for everything. No, I said. You weren't. He looked down. I could have listed examples. The art workshop, the summer writing intensive, the semester abroad my advisor begged me to consider until I saw the cost and did the math myself because I knew better than to ask. The time my father laughed when I suggested helping modernize the store's bookkeeping during college breaks and told me they didn't need me turning a family business into a spreadsheet. The way my mother praised my practicality so often, it became a cage. Instead, I said, they believed in your potential and my endurance. Those are not the same gift. Owen inhaled slowly. That sounds awful when you say it like that. It was awful when I lived it like that. He winced. There it was again. That inconvenient human response. He was listening, really listening, not debating, not redirecting, just absorbing. I thought they leaned on you more because you were better at stuff, he said. I gave him a look. I know how that sounds, he muttered. Yes, I said. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. I mean, I knew I got more help than you. I guess I told myself it was because I needed it more. There are few things sadder than hearing a family myth spoken aloud by the child it favored. And now? I asked. His eyes met mine. Now I think maybe you needed it too. You just stopped asking. The room went very quiet. It is a dangerous thing, having someone name a wound correctly. Even a simple sentence can open a trapdoor beneath years of functioning. I looked away first, toward the dark window. When I was 15, I said, because the memory had risen before I could stop it, Mrs. Bell sent in a portfolio of my drawings to a scholarship program without telling me. I got shortlisted. When the packet came, Mom said it was flattering, but that those schools were expensive and unstable, and I was too smart to build a life on something so uncertain. Owen did not interrupt. So I wrote the decline letter myself, I said. I thanked them for the consideration and said I was choosing a more practical path. My throat tightened on the last few words, and I hated that too. I didn't know that, he said. Of course you didn't. He sat with that a while. Then he said very softly, I'm sorry, Charlie. I closed the laptop. You didn't do that part. No, but I think I benefited from it. I could not argue with that. We stayed like that a little longer, surrounded by old air and old disappointments, and the strange, cautious possibility that maybe not all neglect has to be inherited whole. Before leaving, Owen stood in the doorway and said, What do you need from me tomorrow? I looked at him carefully. Honesty, I said, and no grand ideas unless they come with numbers. For the first time that day, he smiled for real. Small, crooked, familiar. Okay, he said, I can try. The next morning, I began by telling my parents the truth they least wanted. If I'm involved, I said over coffee no one enjoyed, I'm not here to preserve appearances. I'm here to preserve whatever can still be preserved. My mother sat very straight at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around her mug. My father stood by the counter, already defensive, because he recognized the tone I used at work when I was about to become immovable. What exactly does that mean? He asked. It means the store stops operating like a vanity project and starts operating like a distressed business. My mother's face flashed. Vanity project? Yes, I said. You've been buying and presenting for aesthetic identity, not turnover. There is a difference. She looked as if I had slapped her. Owen, to his credit, said nothing. I continued. We need to freeze discretionary spending immediately. We need a real inventory analysis by category and margin. We need to stop reordering slow-moving items because they complete the look. We need vendor negotiations, tax remediation planning, and a weekly cash forecast. We also need to decide whether the goal is survival, sale, or orderly wind down. My father slammed his mug down hard enough to spill coffee onto the counter. Wind down is not on the table. Then stop behaving like a man who can command reality not to notice him, I said. His eyes went cold. You're enjoying this. The accusation hit exactly where he intended, because beneath everything else was the shameful possibility that some bruised part of me did feel a grim satisfaction at being needed so explicitly at last. But satisfaction is not the same as enjoyment, and both are not the same as mercy. No, I said. I'm not enjoying this. I'm just not cushioning it for you. Owen spoke then. Dad, enough. My father rounded on him. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm saying she's right. That sentence changed the room. My mother looked between them, startled. My father looked betrayed, and I felt something shift under my ribs that I could not yet name. Families like ours depend on invisible alliances staying in place. The golden child and the authority figure orbit each other. The practical daughter keeps peace through competence. The mother translates tension into softer language and calls that care. But once one person steps out of their assigned role, the rest of the structure starts to wobble. I said, I need access to the store systems today. My father hesitated. I met his gaze. Now? Half an hour later, the four of us were at Wren and Finch before opening. The sign above the storefront looked polished and tasteful in the early light. Elegant serif letters in brushed gold. Window displays arranged around summer entertaining themes. Linen runners, ceramic pitchers, faux lavender stems in hand-thrown vases. Everything curated to suggest abundance, calm, and cultivated living. Inside, the air smelled like cedar candles and money spent too optimistically. I had not been there in nearly 9 months. Walking in felt like entering a memory with bills attached. The floorboards still creaked near the register. The lighting was still warmer than necessary because my mother believed people bought more when they felt flattered by the room. The back office was still too cramped, with stacks of catalogs and unopened returns leaning against the filing cabinets, and the warehouse still had the same rolling metal door that jammed in humid weather. My father unlocked the office and gave me a spiral notebook full of passwords written in his cramped, slanted handwriting. My heart sank on sight. "This is your system?" I asked. "It works." "No," I said. "It has existed." I spent the first 3 hours logging into platforms, resetting passwords, exporting reports, and trying not to say "Dear God" every 10 minutes. Their bookkeeping software was half-maintained. Sales categories were inconsistent. Some online expenses had been miscoded for months. A warehouse employee had apparently been manually overwriting inventory counts without any approval trail. 2 subscription services were active that no one could explain. There were duplicate vendor files, abandoned promotions, and a bizarre amount of money being spent on branded packaging inserts with my mother's favorite scripted tagline, "Beautiful things, beautifully lived." I muttered it once under my breath, and Owen, who was beside me checking old email threads, almost choked trying not to laugh. "What?" my mother asked sharply from the doorway. "Nothing," we both said at once. That should have irritated me, the sudden accidental alliance of it. Instead, it felt strangely familiar, like a sibling shape we had not worn since childhood. By lunchtime, I had enough data to start making the first set of cuts. "No more custom packaging inserts," I said. My mother objected immediately. "That's part of our brand experience. It's part of your margin problem. We can't become cheap." "You already became unstable." Her mouth tightened. "No more paid search campaigns until we fix the conversion funnel. No new seasonal orders without category-level approval. No rush shipping except for verified high-margin items. And someone needs to call these 4 vendors today before they freeze you completely." My father crossed his arms. "I can handle vendors." "No," I said. "You handled them into this." He glared at me, but Owen said, "She should do it." I looked at him. "Not me. You." He blinked. "Me?" "Yes. You're charming, remember? Use it for a useful purpose." He gave one startled laugh. "That may be the nicest insulting thing you've ever said to me." "I'm efficient with language." He stood there with the vendor list in his hand, and then, to my surprise, he nodded. "Okay." I expected him to fail, not because I thought he was incapable of speaking to people, but because real negotiation under pressure is a different muscle than networking in hopeful rooms. It requires humility, precision, and the willingness to sit inside discomfort without performing your way around it. Instead, over the next 2 hours, he did better than I expected. Not brilliantly, not magically, but better. He listened more than he talked. He wrote things down. He asked for time. He accepted criticism without getting defensive. One vendor agreed to a staggered payment plan if we paid something immediately. Another gave us 7 more days before formal hold. A third was icy, but not impossible. After his last call, Owen came into the office and sat down heavily. "That was horrible," he said. "Yes," I said, still typing. "They all. No." "Yes." He leaned back and exhaled. "This is the first time in my life I've understood why you like numbers. At least they tell the truth." I stopped typing for a second and looked at him. "That might be the smartest thing you've ever said to me." He grinned weakly. "We're both growing." By late afternoon, I had built a survival map ugly enough to be real. If the store cut aggressively, negotiated skillfully, sold dead inventory fast, paused ego spending, and generated a short burst of cash, there was a path. Narrow. Embarrassing, but possible. At the center of that path was one painful fact. They needed money immediately, not enough to erase everything, enough to stop the bleeding while we forced better behavior. I printed the cash summary and laid it on the counter in the office. My parents stood on one side. Owen and I stood on the other. For a second, it looked less like a family and more like opposing legal counsel. "This is the gap," I said. My mother stared at the page. "That much?" "Yes." My father's face went blank in the way men's faces sometimes do when they are trying to stay upright inside themselves. "We don't have that," he said. I looked at him steadily. "I know." No one spoke. Then my mother said, almost too quietly to hear, "Could Charlotte lend it?" For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Owen's head snapped toward her. My father said nothing, which was somehow worse. I felt a heat move through me, so sudden and clean, that it almost steadied me. "You are asking me," I said, "to put my savings into the business you didn't trust me to advise." "It would only be temporary," my mother said quickly, "just until things stabilize." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because some moments are too exact in their cruelty not to produce a sound. "No?" My father stiffened. "Charlotte." "No." Families help each other. I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw not authority, not disappointment, not even anger. I saw a man who had confused access with entitlement for so long, he no longer knew the difference. "Families also don't drain one daughter dry while building a shrine to the other son's potential," I said. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "That isn't fair." "No," I said. "Fair would have looked different 20 years ago." Owen stepped in before either parent could answer. "She's not giving you her savings." All three of us turned toward him. My father stared. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." "This is none of your business." Owen actually laughed then, stunned into it. "The family business collapsing is not my business?" "You've never shown much interest before." The cruelty of that was breathtaking, because it was both true and carefully incomplete. Owen had not shown much interest, because he had been allowed not to. He had been cast as future genius, not present responsibility. Owen's face changed. "Wow," he said softly. "That's what we're doing?" My mother moved toward him. "He doesn't mean that." "Yes, he does," I said. Owen kept looking at our father. "You paid my rent out of a trust you took from both of us, and now you want her to save you too?" It was all for the family. "It was all for control," I said. No one contradicted me. And that was the moment I realized something important. Not comforting. Important. They had not called me because they finally saw me. They had called me because collapse had stripped away every other option. That hurt. More than I expected, even after everything. There is something uniquely painful about being valued accurately only when your usefulness becomes urgent. But pain clarifies. I folded the cash summary in half. "I will help restructure," I said. "I will help negotiate. I will help you understand exactly what needs to happen. But I am not funding this, and I am not moving back. And if anyone lies to me again, I walk." My father's face hardened. "You'd let us lose everything." There it was, the final weapon of people who have exhausted reason. Moral blackmail. I met his gaze. "No, you risked losing everything. I'm the one trying to limit the damage." He looked at me for a long time, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he saw me then. Not as the easy daughter, not as the dependable extension of his own needs, but as a separate adult with boundaries. he could not purchase through guilt. Then my mother said in a small voice, "What are we supposed to do?" I answered her honestly, "Change." The word change did not land like advice. It landed like insult. You would have thought I had asked them to burn the place down themselves, with the way my father recoiled from it. My mother looked as if the air had been taken from the room. Even Owen, who had surprised me twice already that day, went quiet in the particular way. People do when they realize the solution is not dramatic enough to feel noble and not easy enough to avoid. Change is like that. Most people imagine it as one brave decision, a speech, a sacrifice, a clean break. They do not imagine it as spreadsheets, humiliating phone calls, canceled orders, reduced payroll, postponed pride, and the long, unspectacular discipline of behaving differently when no one is clapping. That afternoon, we closed the store 2 hours early under the pretense of a system update. My mother hated that wording because even something as mild as a sign on the door troubled her. She stood by the front windows after the lock clicked and adjusted a display that did not need adjusting, smoothing the edge of a table runner with fingers that had begun to shake. I was in the office entering notes into my laptop when I heard Owen say softly, "Mom." She answered without turning around. "We never close early on Saturdays." "That's not really the problem." "I know what the problem is." "No," I thought. "You know what it feels like to be embarrassed by the problem. That is not the same thing." I did not say it. I had already spent too much of the day weaponizing accuracy. Even when accuracy is deserved, it costs something. A minute later, Owen stepped into the office and leaned against the doorframe. "She's spiraling," he said quietly. "She's reckoning." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." I saved the document and looked up. "How are you doing?" He let out one tired breath through his nose. "Like I walked into a play in the third act and everyone expects me to know my lines." That was fair. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit." He did. The office was small enough that our knees would have knocked if either of us leaned forward. Somewhere in the warehouse, a cartwheel squealed against concrete. The air smelled like printer toner and cedar candlestock. "I need to ask you something," I said. He nodded warily. "How much money do you actually have?" He blinked. "You really do ask questions like a knife." "Yes." He leaned back. "Savings? Not much." "How much is not much?" He named the number. It was less than I expected and more than I feared. Enough to tell me he was not in complete chaos, but not enough to make a meaningful dent in the business without hurting himself. "How stable is your work right now?" He made a face. "Depends how honest you want the answer." "Very." He stared at the ceiling for a second. "I've been doing contract editing, development support, and some branded content work. It's uneven. I've had 2 decent months and 1 bad one. There's a project that might happen in July, but everything is always might happen in July." I nodded. "I'm not asking because I plan to tell them to ask you for money," I said. "Good, because the amount of laughing I would do would be disrespectful." Despite myself, I smiled. He saw it and smiled too, briefly, then sobered. "I should have been around more," he said. I looked down at the laptop. "Maybe?" "No, definitely." I waited. He rubbed his palms together slowly. "I think I liked believing things were handled, not just for me. In general, it made it easier to keep being whatever I was doing." That was also fair. "When Dad helped me," he said, "I told myself that's what families did. And maybe I also told myself you didn't need the same kind of help because you were better at life." I said nothing. He swallowed. "But maybe I only got to stay bad at life because everyone kept cushioning me." That sentence settled in the air between us. It was not self-hatred. It was worse and better than that. Recognition. I said, "You're not bad at life." He looked skeptical. "You're undertrained in consequence," I said. He barked a laugh loud enough that my mother called from the front. "What is going on back there?" "Character development." he called back. I heard her sigh. We spent the rest of the afternoon building a shorter list of immediate actions and assigning responsibilities. It was the least glamorous family meeting in human history. My father would gather every active loan document and stop improvising answers to direct questions. My mother would produce a list of all upcoming purchase orders and identify which vendors she thought might respond to relationship-based negotiation. Owen would review all marketing expenses and customer-facing messaging because, as he put it, if the ship is taking on water, maybe we don't keep paying someone to describe how elegant the deck chairs are. I would build the cash triage plan, the vendor sequence, and a restructuring outline ugly enough to force clarity. No one loved their assignment, which is how I knew we were finally approaching usefulness. By the time we left the store, the sky had gone lavender at the edges. Maple Glen looked the way all small towns do at dusk when they are trying to convince you gentleness is the same thing as innocence. Church steeples against soft light, porch lamps flickering on, people carrying takeout bags and waving from sidewalks. It almost made me angry, the beauty of it. As if surfaces had not already caused enough trouble. At home, my mother reheated a lasagna someone from church had dropped off weeks earlier and frozen. We ate at the kitchen table with the exhausted politeness of people who had not yet decided whether truth had ruined them or saved them. My father drank 2 glasses of wine too quickly. Owen asked practical questions about the online shop, which startled my mother into answering him with real details instead of decorative ones. For the first time in years, I heard them talk about the business as if it were a thing made of operations instead of a reflection of their taste and stamina. Then my father said, "If we'd had better staff, some of this wouldn't have happened." I set down my fork. "No." He looked at me. "No? No. You do not get to outsource responsibility to people you underpaid while you ignored the actual problem. I'm not saying it was all their fault. You're saying it enough to avoid your own." The muscle in his jaw jumped. "Do you have to do that every time I speak?" "Yes," I said, "until you stop narrating yourself like the victim of your own decisions." My mother closed her eyes briefly. Owen stared at his plate, and I could almost hear him thinking, so this is what it feels like when she stops smoothing things for everyone. The meal limped to an end after that. My father went to the den with his wine. My mother cleared plates too fast. Owen offered to help and was waved off. I stayed because I knew my mother needed the friction of ordinary motion before she could say anything true. We stood side by side at the sink for a while. Water running, dishes clinking. The window above the sink reflected us back into the dark kitchen, like 2 women caught in the same frame by accident. Finally, she said, "You think very little of us." I dried a plate slowly before answering. "That's not true." She gave me a tired, disbelieving look. "I think," I said, "that you loved me in a way that required very little from yourselves." The dish towel stopped moving in her hands. "That is a cruel thing to say." "Is it untrue?" She looked down at the sink. "We did our best." There it was, the sacred sentence of parents who want effort to erase effect. "I'm sure you did," I said. "You always make it sound as if we planned to hurt you." "I don't think you planned it. I think you normalized it." A long silence passed. The faucet ran. Somewhere in the den, the television murmured at low volume, though no one was really watching it. My mother finally said, "You were so capable." I laughed softly, without humor. "That's the story you tell yourselves," I said. "That because I coped well, I needed less." Her eyes filled suddenly, and she turned away, wiping her hands harder than necessary. "You make me sound like a terrible mother." I leaned against the counter, exhausted enough to be gentler. "No," I said. "I make you sound like a human one, but being human doesn't erase responsibility." She pressed her lips together. "You don't understand what it was like. Owen was always in some kind of storm. You were—" She hesitated. "Easy? Steady. Useful, I thought. Undemanding. Safer to disappoint." Instead, I said, I was quiet. She did not answer. I dried the last plate and set it in the cupboard. When I was 16, I said, I had a teacher who asked why my parents never came to the gallery night for student work. I told her you were busy. She said, they must be proud. And I remember thinking, I don't know if that's the same thing. My mother closed her eyes. I didn't know you remembered all this, she whispered. I looked at her then, fully, and it struck me with a kind of calm sadness that she truly might not have known, not because the moments were hidden, because they had not cost her enough to stay vivid. That, I said quietly, is part of the problem. I went upstairs after that, before either of us could say something worse. Sleep came in scraps. My mind kept building pathways through disaster, and then doubling back through childhood. As if the business and the family had become one knotted thing, my brain could not stop worrying with its teeth. By morning, I had 3 hours of real rest, and a plan severe enough to offend everyone. At the store, I called a meeting before opening. Just the 4 of us again in the office, where the air conditioner rattled, and my father already looked irritated by the existence of structure. I've run the numbers 6 different ways, I said, laying out. Printed sheets. There is no version where you keep operating exactly as you are and survive this. My mother stared at the packet as if its font choices had personally insulted her. So what are you saying? She asked. I'm saying we need a controlled cutback now. My father folded his arms. How controlled? I slid the first page toward him. Warehouse hours reduced. 2 part-time positions paused unless sales recover. Immediate liquidation of dead inventory through online bundle sales and a warehouse clearance event. Freeze on all non-essential buying. Rent renegotiation request. Tax repayment plan application. Direct outreach to top 20 repeat customers with honest but strategic messaging about supporting a local business during a reset. My mother blinked. A clearance event? Yes. We don't do clearance events. You do now. That will cheapen the brand. No, Owen said before I could. Being shut down will cheapen the brand. She turned to him, shocked. He lifted both hands. I'm just saying what she would say with fewer syllables. I almost smiled. My father tapped the paper with one finger. Reducing staff will create panic. Not reducing staff may create insolvency. I built this place. Yes, I said, and now you need to decide whether you love building it more than saving it. He hated that. I could see it in the hard line of his shoulders, the way he refused to sit even though the conversation would have gone better if he had. For my father, standing was authority. Sitting was concession. My mother studied the customer outreach section. Honest messaging about a reset sounds desperate. It sounds human, Owen said. She looked at him again, and this time I could tell she was genuinely disoriented. Owen was not supposed to speak this language. He was supposed to be the child of aspirations and anecdotes, not margins and messaging ethics. I realized then that my mother's favoritism had not just elevated him, it had flattened him into something simpler than he was. That did not absolve him, but it complicated the picture. The meeting ended with reluctant agreement on most of the triage steps and active resistance on 2. My father refused to consider pausing one of the least profitable but most image-rich product lines. My mother refused to approve wording for customer outreach that admitted the business was under pressure. I said, then write better truthful language. Owen said, I'll draft it. And somehow that became the arrangement. The next 3 days moved like a long emergency with paperwork. I took unpaid time off from my own job and worked out of the store office from morning to evening, fielding calls, organizing debts, building forecasts, and trying not to become everyone's emotional trash can. Owen stayed too. He postponed his flight indefinitely and slept on the pull-out couch at the house. Every day he surprised me in one small way. He learned the inventory system faster than expected. He made vendor calls without dramatizing them afterward. He rewrote website copy so it sounded grounded instead of manicured. He talked one furious customer down from posting a public complaint by apologizing like a grown man instead of deflecting like a performer. He also forgot to eat twice, misplaced his phone 3 times, and once nearly sent an internal pricing spreadsheet to the customer email list, so I did not become unreasonable about his transformation. But he was trying, truly trying, and effort, when real, has its own gravity. My father improved least. That sounds unkind. It is just accurate. He complied where he had to, resisted where he could, and kept slipping back into the belief that visible confidence was the same thing as leadership. Twice I caught him minimizing vendor risk in conversations with staff. Once I found him drafting an email to the landlord that said temporary market headwinds rather than what we had agreed on, which was a straightforward request for a lease conversation based on cash compression and a proposed corrective plan. I deleted the phrase temporary market headwinds without asking. He glared at me. You can't just rewrite my communication. I can when your communication is trying to flirt with denial. He muttered something under his breath about disrespect. I said, I'm not your subordinate. And that became the rhythm between us. Not resolution, containment. My mother oscillated between efficiency and grief. 1 hour she was all business, pulling order files and calling vendors with strained charm. The next, she was standing in the sales floor, touching folded napkins like they were relics from a better version of herself. I knew enough not to rush her through that. For her, Wren and Finch was never just income. It was identity, status, proof that her taste had value. Asking her to surrender any of its polished surfaces felt, to her, like asking her to stand in town naked. On Wednesday afternoon, while Owen was downstairs photographing dead stock for online bundles, and my father was at the bank, my mother came into the office and shut the door behind her. I need to ask you something, she said. Her tone made me sit back. Okay. She held a folder against her chest with both hands. If we have to sell... I waited. If we have to sell the business, she said, each word seeming to cost her something. Would anyone buy it? I did not answer immediately because careless hope is cruelty and careless pessimism is vanity. Possibly, I said, but not at the price you think, and not in its current shape without pain. Her eyes flickered. Pain meaning? Meaning reduced leverage, meaning debt affects valuation, meaning you may not control the narrative, meaning a buyer would not be purchasing your memory of what this place was. They'd be purchasing what it can realistically become. She sat down very slowly in the chair across from me. I can't believe this is happening. I looked at her for a long moment. I could have said, it has been happening for a year, or longer. I could have said, disbelief is not a strategy. Instead, I said the truest thing available. I know. She studied my face. Why are you still here? It was not an accusation. It was genuine bewilderment. I thought about that before answering. Because I still love you, though not safely. Because I love competence more than resentment in a crisis. Because some part of me is still the child who thought if I did enough, someone might finally see me. Because walking away before I understand the ending would haunt me. Instead, I said, because losing everything won't undo what already happened. My mother's eyes filled again. That's not what I meant. I know. No, she said, shaking her head. I mean, why are you helping us at all? I folded my hands together to keep from fidgeting. Because I'm not you, I said. That hurt her. I saw it land. But it was not spite. It was the most merciful boundary I had. She looked down at the folder in her lap. When you were little, she said quietly, you used to line up your pencils by color before you started homework. I frowned slightly, thrown by the turn. You were 7, maybe 8. Owen would dump his backpack in the hall and disappear outside, and you would sit down at the table and make everything neat first. I used to watch you and think, she will be all right in this world. Something in my chest twisted. And Owen? I asked. She gave a sad, helpless little laugh. I watched him and thought, If I don't keep intervening, life will eat him alive. There it was. The whole family system in 2 confessions. And it never occurred to you, I said, that I might have wanted intervening too? She looked up at me through tears she was clearly trying to manage. I think, she said, that I mistook your self-control for invulnerability. The sentence was so close to truth that for a second I could not speak. Then I said, yes. Just that, yes. And for one suspended moment, something softened. Not repaired, softened. Which is not the same thing, but is sometimes the furthest honesty can go in a room like that. The softness did not survive the next day. Thursday morning, I got a call from my boss asking whether I could join an urgent video meeting about a reporting issue. I stepped into the alley behind the store with my laptop balanced on a stack of shipping crates, handled the call in 22 minutes, solved the problem, and returned to find my father on the sales floor, speaking to one of the younger part-time employees in the clipped, patronizing tone he used when he felt exposed. Her name was Ava. 23, efficient, underpaid, smarter than he realized. She had worked there 18 months and was one of the only reasons their online order fulfillment had not already collapsed. She was standing stiffly near the register while he said, "I don't want excuses. I want initiative." I stopped 3 feet away and listened. Ava said carefully, "I was asking whether the pricing on the clearance bundles had been finalized because I don't want to post the wrong thing." "You should be able to figure that out." "No," I said. "She shouldn't." My father turned. "What?" "She should not have to guess pricing because you dislike systems." Ava looked like she wished the floor would open. My father lowered his voice, which was somehow more aggressive than if he had raised it. "Don't do this in front of staff. Then don't manage your fear by bullying the competent 23-year-old. Ava made a tiny sound that might have been a swallowed breath. My father flushed. "I was not bullying anyone." Ava, to her eternal credit, stared very hard at the register and said nothing. I stepped closer and kept my voice even. "The bundles are Folder B, Tab 3, final numbers highlighted in yellow. Ava, if anything is unclear, ask me directly." She nodded once and disappeared into the back, so fast it bordered on teleportation. My father stared at me. "You are undermining me." "No," I said. "Reality is undermining you. I'm just refusing to participate." He looked around the empty store as if searching for an audience sympathetic to him and finding none. Then he said something he should have kept behind his teeth. "You've been waiting years to put me in my place." The sentence hit a live wire somewhere deep. I answered before caution could intervene. "No," I said. "I spent years waiting for you to stop putting me in mine." His face changed, not with understanding, with impact, as if he had walked into a door he did not believe was closed. For a second, we simply stood there, surrounded by polished shelves and summer tableware and all the elegant little objects people buy to feel their lives are arranged. Then he said, quieter, "I did what I thought was right." I looked at him and felt the old, exhausting split open inside me again. The one between compassion and memory. "Maybe," I said, "but what you thought was right always cost me more than it cost anyone else." He had no answer for that. That evening, something happened that shifted the story again. Owen found a file. It was not dramatic at first glance. Just one mislabeled folder in a neglected drawer of the office filing cabinet while he was looking for old wholesale agreements. But inside were documents my father had not mentioned, including an unsigned consulting proposal from 3 years earlier, an email chain, and handwritten notes in the margins of printed financial statements. The proposal was mine. I recognized the formatting before I fully understood what I was seeing. 3 years earlier, after a Christmas visit, where I had spent 2 days quietly untangling inventory discrepancies for them in between holiday meals, I had gone home and sent a careful offer. Not intrusive, not arrogant. A part-time consulting plan to help modernize their reporting, tighten cash controls, and identify margin leaks over 6 months. I charged them below market because they were family. I wrote it so gently, it practically apologized for existing. They never responded. I had told myself they forgot, or got busy, or felt awkward mixing family and business. I had allowed them every possible gracious explanation because the alternative was too humiliating. But the email chain attached to the printout stripped all that mercy away. My mother had written, "I don't want Charlotte coming in here and making everything feel cold." My father had replied, "Agreed. She sees problems everywhere. Last thing we need is to have her auditing us like strangers." Then, in handwriting along the margin of my printed proposal, my father had scrawled, "Owen may want to come home and take a role eventually. Don't complicate structure." I stood there with the papers in my hand and felt something old and carefully buried begin to burn cleanly. Owen was across the room sorting vendor receipts when he noticed my face. "What?" I handed him the pages. He read them more quickly than I had, then more slowly. By the end, his ears had gone red. "Oh," he said, "there are moments when grief turns from soft ache into precise architecture. You can suddenly see every beam that held it up, every sentence that built the house around it." I had not been ignored by accident. I had been rejected deliberately, not because I lacked skill, because my competence threatened the fantasy that the business would one day belong, in spirit, if not in structure, to the son they had spent years imagining at its center. Even after all his drifting, even after all my evidence, even then, my name is Charlotte, and in that moment, I realized I had not been the backup plan. I had been the emergency generator they hoped never to acknowledge until the lights went out. Owen set the papers down like they might cut him. "I didn't know," he said. "I know." "No," he said, voice tight now. "I really didn't. Charlie, I swear to you, I never wanted this place. Not like that. I mean, as a fantasy maybe when I was younger, because Dad would talk about legacy and I liked the sound of it, but I never—" He stopped and dragged a hand through his hair. "This is awful." Yes, I thought. It is. But the strange thing was, once the ugliness became visible, some of its power changed. Pain hurts differently when it is named in ink. I picked up the folder again and slid the papers back inside. "Where are Mom and Dad?" "In the warehouse," he said. I nodded once. He stood. "Do you want me there?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said. We found them near the shelving units where overstocked ceramic pitchers sat in careful rows like witnesses. My mother was comparing order numbers to a clipboard. My father was on a ladder checking top-shelf boxes with the stiff, irritated energy of a man who believes manual effort can still outrun accountability. "I need to ask you about something," I said. My father climbed down one step and looked annoyed before he even knew the subject. "Can it wait?" "No." He reached the floor. My mother looked up from the clipboard and saw my face, then Owen's, and immediately went still. I held up the folder. "What is that?" my father asked. "Your answer," I said, "to the consulting proposal I sent 3 years ago." No one moved. Then my mother said too quickly, "Charlotte!" "No, not this time." My father's eyes narrowed. "Where did you find that?" "In your filing cabinet, with the documents you didn't think mattered enough to mention." He said nothing. I opened the folder and read his margin note aloud. I kept my voice steady because shouting would only have made this easier for him. Shouting invites dismissal. Calm demands hearing. Owen may want to come home and take a role eventually. Don't complicate structure. My mother looked as if she might sit down on the concrete floor. Owen said quietly, "Dad." My father's face hardened in that old, familiar way, the way it did whenever vulnerability approached, and he decided anger would be more flattering. "You're making too much of this." I laughed once because at that point, laughter was safer than fury. "Am I? It was a business decision." "No," I said. It was a family decision disguised as a business one. My mother whispered, "We didn't want conflict." There it was again. The worship of ease, the principle around which so much harm had been organized. "You didn't want me in the room," I said, "because if I was in the room, you'd have to take me seriously." "That isn't true," she said, but without conviction. I looked at my father. Was I qualified? He did not answer. Was I qualified? His jaw worked once. Yes. Would my plan have helped? A longer silence. Yes, he said at last. The warehouse seemed to change temperature. I nodded slowly. So you knew? My father spread his hands, impatient now, trapped now. I knew you were competent. That wasn't the issue. No, I said. The issue was that competence looked wrong on me. That's ridiculous. Is it? Owen stepped closer to him. You chose the idea of me over the reality of her. My father turned on him. Don't talk to me like you understand this. I understand enough. No, you don't. You were out there chasing nonsense while we were here holding this together. The words cracked through the warehouse. Owen went still. My mother said his name in warning, but too late. All my life, I had watched my father use disappointment as a scalpel, precise and punishing. He knew where to cut because he had taught himself our weak points as if they were part of his paternal rights. Owen's face changed in a way I had almost never seen. The easy charm vanished completely. What remained was older, harder, and much sadder. Nonsense, he repeated. My father looked as though he regretted it for half a second, but pride arrived before apology could. I mean unstable work, fantasy work, you know what I mean. Owen laughed, but the sound was brittle. Wow. He turned away for a second, then turned back. You spent my whole life telling me I was special, and then used that as an excuse not to expect anything from me. And now you're calling the result nonsense? Owen, my mother said. No, let him answer. My father said nothing. Owen took one breath and kept going. Do you know what the worst part is? I believed you. I believed I was one big break away from becoming the person you kept describing. Meanwhile, Charlie was actually becoming someone solid, and you treated that like furniture. Useful. Invisible. My throat tightened unexpectedly. My father looked from him to me and back again, and for the first time, I think he realized the shape of what he had built. Not just debt, not just bad decisions. A family organized around fantasy and extraction. He put a hand on the metal shelf beside him, as if steadying himself. This is not fair, he said, though his voice had lost force. I almost said fairness entered this room too late to matter, but Owen got there first. No, he said, it isn't. After that, no one said much for a while. It is remarkable how loud silence can become in a warehouse full of beautiful things no one needs urgently. Ceramic, linen, glass, decorative trays, scented candles, all of it arranged for comfort and aspiration, while the people standing among it tried not to look directly at the truth. My mother put the clipboard down on a carton of serving bowls and pressed her fingers to her temple. My father stared at the concrete floor with the expression of a man who had just realized that authority does not survive being named aloud. Owen looked as if he had finally reached the edge of a story he had spent years pretending was still at the beginning. And I stood there holding the folder with my old proposal inside it, feeling calmer than I had any right to feel. That was the strange part. Not happy, not vindicated, calm. Because once something hidden becomes visible, you no longer have to waste energy protecting yourself from the possibility of it. The wound acquires edges, and edges, however painful, are easier to work around than fog. My mother was the first to speak. We were trying to keep peace, she said, almost pleading. I looked at her. Peace for whom? Her lips parted and then closed again. For them, I thought. Always for them. Peace had always meant avoiding discomfort for the people with more power in the room. Peace meant I absorbed it quietly. Peace meant Owen stayed buoyant. Peace meant my father was never challenged directly enough to have to rethink himself. Peace meant my mother could continue calling the resulting imbalance love. No one answered, and the silence did the work for me. Finally, I said, "I'm going back to the office." Not because the conversation was resolved, because it was not. But there are only so many emotional detonations a day can sustain before paperwork becomes the only merciful language left. I turned and walked out before anyone could ask anything of me. Owen followed a minute later. He caught up with me in the narrow hallway between the warehouse and the office and touched my elbow lightly, almost uncertainly. "Charlie." I stopped. He did not say "I'm sorry" this time. That would have been too small and too familiar. Instead, he said, "I don't think I understood how much of your life got arranged around everyone else." I leaned against the wall for a second and closed my eyes. "Neither did I," I said. That was the truth I was only beginning to admit. Resentment had always given me pieces of the picture, but not the whole of it. It is one thing to know you were undervalued. It is another to understand just how thoroughly your identity formed around being the stable surface other people landed on. He stayed quiet. Then I said, "Do you know what's funny?" "Probably not." "I used to think if I became impressive enough, it would correct something retroactively." He frowned, as if being competent, successful, solvent, needed, as if all of that would somehow rewrite what came before. He nodded slowly. "And now?" he asked. I looked toward the office door. "Now I think it just made me useful in a more expensive way." The words sat between us. Then he asked very softly, "Do you want to stop?" I turned to him. He looked serious. No performance, no family guilt dressed up as concern. A real question. "We can leave," he said. "Not forever, maybe. Or forever. I don't know. But if you're only doing this because you can't stand the thought of being the bad daughter, I think maybe you're allowed to stop." That startled me more than anything else he had said in the last 4 days. Because it was the question no one in this family had ever asked me before. Not what can you do? Not what do you think? Not what do we need? What do you want, and are you allowed to want it? I looked at him for a long moment and said, "I'm not staying because I'm afraid of being bad." He waited. "I'm staying because I want witness," I said. "If this business survives, I want to know exactly what it cost, and if it doesn't, I want the truth on the record." He nodded once. "Okay." Then he gave a small, tired smile and said, "That sounds very you." "Yes," I said, "it does." Back in the office, I worked until well after closing. Numbers are a relief after family conversations. Not because they are kinder, because they are impersonal. A shortfall is not disappointed in you. An interest rate does not compare siblings. A balance sheet does not confuse sacrifice with affection. It simply tells the truth and waits to see whether you are disciplined enough to accept it. By 6:30, I had built a revised forecast that assumed lower sales, slower vendor cooperation, and a clearance event turnout that was merely decent rather than miraculous. It still produced a path, though narrower than before. At 7, Ava knocked on the office door. "Sorry," she said, lingering uncertainly in the doorway. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." She stepped in and closed the door behind her. In daylight and movement, she always seemed younger than her work maid. Her ponytail was slipping. There was a cardboard dust mark on one sleeve. She held a printed list in both hands with the careful grip of someone who expects information to be challenged. "I put together the dead inventory bundles and the markdown schedule," she said, "and I made notes on which products haven't moved in 6 months, 9 months, and over a year." I took the pages from her. They were thorough, cleaner than anything I had seen from their systems in days. "This is excellent," I said. She visibly relaxed. Then she hesitated. "Can I say something?" "Yes." She glanced toward the sales floor, as if checking for my father through walls. I know it's none of my business, she said, but I'm glad you're here. The sentence landed more heavily than she could have known. Thank you, I said. She shifted again. It's just, things have felt weird for a long time. Like everyone could tell something was off, but no one was allowed to say it. I thought of childhood, adulthood, entire family systems. That sounds familiar, I said. She gave a small, uncertain laugh. Your dad always made it sound temporary. Your mom always made it sound tasteful. And Owen. She stopped. I raised an eyebrow. He always seemed nice, she said carefully. But not really from here, if that makes sense. I almost smiled. It does. She nodded. Anyway, it feels different now. Still bad, but different. Different how? She thought about it. Like the story changed. After she left, I sat there for a long moment with her words. The story changed. Yes. Not because the crisis improved. It had not. The debts were still real. The house was still exposed. The business was still fragile enough that one bad week could undo days of careful effort. But the emotional geometry had changed. Things were being said in rooms where they had previously only existed as currents. And once a story changes, everyone in it has to work harder to pretend they are still the same person. That night at the house, my father did not come down for dinner. My mother pretended not to mind, but her movements had that clipped, efficient tension that meant she minded very much. She made soup and cut bread and asked Owen if he wanted more, as if he were still 16. He said yes because sometimes love arrives distorted, and people take what shape of it they can. We ate in relative quiet until she asked, "How long can you stay?" She was looking at me, but I had the sense the question was wider than logistics. I need to go back tomorrow night, I said. I can work remotely one more day after that, maybe two, but I have a job. She nodded. Of course. There was so much packed into those two words that I could hardly bear it. Of course you have a job. Of course you have a stable life. Of course you cannot simply hover here indefinitely, the way we might once have expected. Of course the daughter we treated as a reserve system has systems of her own now. Owen said, I can stay longer. My mother looked at him, surprised. You can? He tore bread slowly. I think I need to. She opened her mouth to say something proud or relieved or protective, and I braced instinctively for it, for the familiar glow. The sun stepping up at last. The sun returning. The sun discovering responsibility just in time to be admired for it. But instead she said, Do you have work? He smiled without humor. Some. That's not really an answer. No, he said, it isn't. Then he added, almost matter-of-factly, but maybe that's part of the issue. I looked at him. He did not look at me back. He was looking at the bread in his hands as if it required concentration, but I could feel it all the same. The beginning of something difficult. The unromantic version of growing up. My mother glanced between us, sensing but not naming the shift. After dinner, Owen helped with dishes without being asked. My mother did not comment on it, which was probably wise. Nothing slows new effort like making it ceremonial too early. I took my laptop to the back porch because the house felt too full. The night was soft and damp, crickets in the hedges, a dog barking somewhere faintly down the block. The old porch swing creaked when I sat, though I did not swing. I just rested the laptop beside me and stared out into the dark yard, where my father once taught Owen how to throw a baseball and taught me how to keep score. A few minutes later, the screen door opened. I did not turn. I knew from the weight of the silence before the voice that it was my father. Can I sit? That alone would have told me the world had shifted. I moved the laptop and gestured to the other end of the swing. He sat carefully, as if wary of sudden motions. For a while, we listened to the insects and the far-off drone of traffic from the main road. Then he said, I read your old proposal again. I kept my eyes on the yard. And? And you were right. The words did not feel triumphant, just late. Yes, I said. He exhaled once. I suppose I deserve that. I almost said, this isn't about deserve, it's about record. But I let him continue. I thought, he said slowly, that if you came in, everything would feel exposed. I turned then. Exposed. He nodded, still looking out into the yard. Like the business would stop being ours and start becoming some kind of case study. I studied his face in profile. In the porch light, he looked older than he had all week. Not weaker exactly, more unmistakably mortal. It already was a case study, I said, just not one you were willing to read. A tiny, tired smile crossed his face and disappeared. Probably. He rubbed his hands together once, then let them fall apart again. You always looked at things very directly. No, I said. I learned to. He glanced at me. That mattered. He knew it mattered. The correction was small, but it changed the sentence from trait to adaptation. After a moment, he said, My father despised weakness. I waited. He had a hardware business, smaller than this. Meaner, too. If something went wrong, he'd act like panic was contagious and the cure was contempt. The porch swing creaked as he shifted. I thought confidence was protection, he said, for a long time. I looked at him and thought, that explains some of you. Not enough, but some. He continued, when Owen was little, everything about him seemed breakable and brilliant at the same time. He was all appetite and emotion and ideas. I thought if I didn't keep feeding that, the world would flatten him. And me? He was quiet for so long, I wondered if he would answer. Then he said, You scared me. I stared at him. He seemed not to notice the force of that yet. He just kept looking at the yard, as if confession was easier in the direction of trees. You were sharper than me by 13, he said. More disciplined, too. You saw through people. Through me, probably. And every time you looked at something directly, I felt... He paused, visibly struggling for a word he did not usually permit himself. Measured. The honesty of that was so startling, I forgot, briefly, to be angry. So you diminished me, I said. His jaw tightened. I managed you. No, I said quietly. You diminished me. The porch swing went still. He did not argue, which, from him, felt as close to admission as I had ever seen. I looked back at the yard. My father said, after another long silence, I am not good at apologies. That is not a mystery. That actually got a breath of laughter out of him, brief and rough. Then he said, I was wrong to dismiss you. The sentence did not heal anything. Healing is not a sentence. But it mattered. I know, I said. He nodded once. I was wrong, he repeated, as if the practice of it required one more pass. We sat there in the damp dark while something old and rigid shifted half an inch. Not enough to trust. Enough to register. Then he ruined it slightly by saying, You don't have to enjoy being right this much. I turned to him in disbelief. He looked back at me, and for the first time in days, I saw something almost ordinary in his expression. Defensive humor, annoyance, an attempt at shared language. I don't enjoy it, I said. I enjoy documentation. That made him laugh properly once, then shake his head. There you are. I wanted to tell him I had always been there. That was the whole point. But the night had given us as much honesty as it could hold. So I let it go. Before going inside, he said, I'm not asking you for money again. I searched his face. Good, I said. I know that was insulting. It was entitled. He nodded. Yes. There it was. Another small, ugly, necessary truth. By Friday morning, the clearance event was ready. I had argued for calling it a warehouse reset rather than a liquidation sale because language matters when you are trying to survive without inviting carrion. Owen turned that into a simple, grounded email and social post. Fresh finds, rare markdowns, limited quantities, local support matters. Honest enough not to lie. Framed enough not to bleed in public. By 9:30, there was a line. Not a miraculous one, not viral, just real. People from town, loyal customers, curious bargain hunters, a few interior design hobbyists who always appeared whenever linen went below ego price. 2 women from church hugging my mother too long and speaking in the high, bright tones of people who smell trouble and are determined to call it prayer. The store filled quickly. Ava ran checkout with the steadiness of a field medic. Another employee handled restocking. Owen floated, answering questions, carrying boxes, joking with customers, just enough to keep energy light. My mother moved through the room with that particular grace women develop when public composure is the last structure standing. My father stayed mostly in the back, which was wise. I worked the office and the register overflow, watching numbers come through in real time. It was not enough to save them outright, but by noon, it was enough to change the immediate week. Enough to pay one vendor installment and cover payroll without another desperate shuffle. Enough to buy time, which is the only thing money really is in a crisis. Around 1, I stepped onto the sales floor for water and nearly ran into Mrs. Kessler, my high school guidance counselor. She was older, of course, softer around the jaw, more silver in her hair, but instantly recognizable. She looked at me for half a second before her face lit. Charlotte Hayes. No one had called me by my full maiden name rhythm like that in years. Mrs. Kessler, I said. She squeezed my forearm warmly. I heard you were in town helping your parents. I smiled politely. Something like that. She looked around the store and lowered her voice. You always were the one who could sort things out. There was nothing malicious in it, nothing even particularly loaded, just an ordinary observation from someone who remembered the shape I wore as a teenager, but something in me resisted it now. No, I said gently. I was the one people expected to sort things out. Her expression shifted, not offended, attentive. Then she smiled in a different way, sadder, smarter. Yes, she said. That sounds more accurate. The conversation moved on after that to harmless things, where I lived, what work I did, whether I was married. I answered lightly and escaped as soon as courtesy allowed. But the sentence stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. Expected to sort things out. That was the family role, yes. But it had also become an identity I wore so long I stopped noticing where it pinched. It gave me competence, dignity, and a certain unshakable life force. It also trained me to equate worth with utility. No wonder I had stayed too long in jobs, relationships, and obligations that praised my steadiness while taking it for granted. No wonder so many compliments had felt like traps. By closing time, the event had exceeded my modest forecast. Not enough to make anyone reckless. Enough to let us breathe through the weekend. We locked up in a kind of collective daze. My mother sat on a stool behind the register and took off her shoes. Owen leaned against a display table, drinking warm bottled water. Ava and the other staff left with tired waves and the subtle speed of people who know better than to linger inside a family earthquake. My father counted drawers in silence. Then Owen said, "We did okay." I looked at the day totals one more time before answering. "Yes," I said. "We did." My mother covered her mouth with one hand, not crying exactly, containing the possibility. My father said, "Good work, everyone." It was such a formal sentence that for a moment none of us knew what to do with it. Then he looked at Ava's empty station, then at Owen, then at me, and finally at my mother. He added, "Especially Ava, and Charlotte." It was clumsy, incomplete. But I had learned enough about human beings to recognize effort when it was real, even if elegance lagged behind. "Thank you," I said. My mother looked at me then, with an expression I could not entirely read. Pride, maybe. Regret, definitely. Recognition, possibly. Love, in the complicated late form it sometimes arrives. That night, after takeout eaten out of containers because no one had the strength for anything else, I went upstairs to pack a small bag. I planned to return to Hartford tomorrow night. My life was waiting. My actual job was waiting. My rent. My fern. My ordinary, earned, unglamorous, self-built life. I was folding a sweater when my mother appeared in the doorway, holding a long, flat envelope. "I found this," she said. I looked up. "What is it?" She stepped into the room and handed it to me. Inside was an old portfolio sleeve, thin, black, worn at the edges. My hands slowed. She sat on the bed while I opened it. My drawings, not all of them, but enough. Charcoal studies, ink sketches. The city rooftop series I did at 17. A watercolor portrait of my grandmother. 2 figure drawings from a community college class I took at night during my sophomore year. A half-finished storefront rendering I had once made of Wren and Finch itself, though in my version, the windows were bigger and the light inside warmer. I looked up at her. "You kept these?" She folded her hands in her lap. "Some." "Why?" Her eyes moved to the drawings and then back to my face. "Because I loved them," she said. The answer unsettled me more than an apology might have. "Then why?" "I know," she said quickly, voice thin now. "I know." I sat down slowly in the desk chair because standing had become difficult. She took a breath. Sometimes loving something and believing in its future are not the same in a person. I think I told myself I was protecting you from disappointment. And were you? She shook her head, tears already rising. No. There it was again. Small truth, late truth, still truth. I looked at the drawings spread across my lap and remembered the physical sensation of making them, the quiet of concentration, the deep private certainty of seeing something correctly and bringing it into being line by line. I had not stopped making art completely over the years, but I had exiled it to hobby, to afterthought, to the safe edges of adult life where desire goes when it learns it is inconvenient. My mother watched me with a look I had never seen on her before, one stripped of performance, stripped of defense, stripped almost to grief. I didn't know how to mother 2 children who needed such different things, she said. I touched the corner of the watercolor of my grandmother. That may be true, I said, but you didn't even ask. She closed her eyes. No, she whispered. I didn't. We stayed that way for a while, both of us looking at the papers. Then she said, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, "You should have been allowed to be more than the one who coped." And that sentence, of all of them, found the deepest place. Not because it fixed anything, it did not, but because somewhere inside me, a younger self who had stood in kitchens and classrooms and dorm rooms swallowing down ordinary heartbreak, finally heard an adult say the thing no one had said when it would have mattered most. You should have been allowed. I cried then. Not dramatically, not all at once, just the kind of silent, exhausted crying that comes when your body realizes it has been carrying a verdict for years, and someone has finally appealed it out loud. My mother cried too. We did not hug immediately. That would have been too easy, too cinematic. We just sat in the room with the drawings between us and the old air around us, and the knowledge that love, when mishandled long enough, becomes a language both people have to relearn if they want any hope of speaking it honestly. Eventually she stood. I'm sorry, she said. I nodded, because I believed she meant it, and because belief is different from absolution. After she left, I stayed up a long time with the drawings spread across the bed. At one point, Owen knocked softly and cracked the door open. Everything okay? I considered the question. No, I said, but maybe also yes. He saw the portfolio and blinked. Oh. I held up the storefront rendering. Apparently, I redesigned the family business at 19. He came in and sat beside me on the bed, looking at it. This is better than the real windows, he said. I know. He smiled. Then his gaze moved over the other pieces, and he got quiet in a different way than usual. You were really good, he said. I let out one soft breath. I was. He turned toward me. No, I mean really. There was no pity in it, no retroactive sibling diplomacy, just observation. For some reason, that made my throat tighten again. He touched the edge of the charcoal study carefully, not quite resting his fingers on it. Do you still do this? Sometimes? Why only sometimes? I looked at him. He grimaced. Sorry, that was a stupid question. No, I said. It wasn't. Why only sometimes? Because practicality became a religion. Because usefulness took up all the oxygen. Because once people praise the stable version of you long enough, it becomes hard to justify feeding the unruly, alive parts. Because I got good at surviving and confused that with living. Instead, I said, life got organized. He laughed softly. That sounds like the saddest sentence I've heard all week. Yes, I said, it does. He was quiet for a second, then said, when this is over, you should make something. I looked at him. Not because it's healing, he added quickly, or symbolic, or any other annoying thing people say. Just because maybe not everything in your life should have to be useful first. That landed harder than he knew, or maybe exactly as hard as he intended. Either way, I did not answer right away. I just looked at my old drawings and thought about the woman I had become, the girl I had been, and the possibility that they did not have to remain estranged forever. If you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe to Bedtime Threads for more long-form stories about betrayal, resilience, family drama, and the quiet kind of justice that takes its time. The next morning, I woke before dawn and did not know where I was for 3 full seconds. That happens to me sometimes when I sleep in old places. My body remembers before my mind does. The room was gray-blue with early light. The ceiling slanted above me. The closet door still did not shut properly. Somewhere downstairs, pipes shifted. For one suspended moment, I was 17 again, lying in bed and trying to calculate whether wanting something badly enough counted as a personal flaw if no one else considered it practical. Then I heard a truck on the main road, and the spell broke. I was 32. The family business was one strong wind from collapse. My parents had finally started saying things that should have been said years ago. Owen was sleeping downstairs on a pull-out couch he had probably already complained internally about in at least 3 cinematic metaphors. And I was supposed to drive back to Hartford that evening with some version of closure I did not yet trust. I got dressed quietly and took the portfolio downstairs with me before I could decide not to. The kitchen was empty, pale morning light through the window, coffee not yet made. The ordinary holiness of an untouched day before people begin filling it with themselves. I set the portfolio on the table and made coffee the way I always do at home, which is to say like a person who respects caffeine but does not romanticize it. When the first cup was ready, I stood by the sink and looked out at the backyard. The grass needed cutting. The azaleas had mostly blown. The old maple near the fence leaned slightly more than I remembered. Time had moved here, even if my parents had tried to decorate over the fact. I heard footsteps behind me. Please tell me that's coffee and not one of Mom's herbal disasters. Owen's voice, sleep rough and human. I handed him a mug without turning. Coffee. He made a grateful sound. You may be the actual hero of this family. No, I said. That title has historically been assigned elsewhere. He took the correction with a quiet wince, and then came to stand beside me at the sink. We drank in silence for a while. After a minute, he noticed the portfolio on the table. You brought it downstairs. Yes. He nodded as if that mattered, and maybe it did. Then he said, I was thinking about something last night. That sounds dangerous. Very funny. I know. He leaned one shoulder against the counter. I think I need to tell you something before you leave. I looked at him then. He looked nervous, which on Owen sat strangely. He had always been more comfortable in uncertainty than most people, at least outwardly. But this was different. This was not uncertainty about a project or a city or a life direction. This was moral speech. Family speech. The kind that cannot be backspaced. Okay, I said. He stared into his coffee for a moment and then said, I used to love it when they compared us. The honesty of that stopped me still. He rushed on. Not all the time, and not in some evil way. He exhaled. I knew they leaned toward me. I knew it, even when I pretended not to. And when they'd talk about how driven I was, or how imaginative, or how I was going somewhere big, some awful part of me liked hearing it next to how sensible you were. I did not speak. I think, he said, voice tightening, that I built part of myself out of being the one they believed in more. The kitchen seemed to hold still around us. There is an unusual kind of pain in hearing someone confess a benefit they drew from your diminishment, not because it surprises you, because it confirms the part you always suspected, but could never ethically prove. I set my mug down carefully. Thank you for saying that, I said. He looked up, startled. That's all? No, it's not all, but it matters that you said it. He nodded once, swallowing. I'm ashamed of it, he said. Yes, I said. You should be. He actually laughed once under his breath. That feels very on brand for you. I'm not going to comfort you out of an accurate feeling. I know. We stood with that for a while. Then he said, I also think I resented you for not falling apart. I blinked. What? He rubbed a hand across his face. Whenever I was a mess, you were just functional, capable, calm. You seemed untouched by things that wrecked me. And instead of wondering what it cost you to look that way, I think I decided you must not be paying much. I looked at him for a long time. That was one of the cruelest distortions of competence. People imagine self-containment is cheap because they do not hear the internal labor. I was paying, I said quietly. I know that now. There was nothing to add to that. Some truths do not expand. They just settle. A little later, our mother came. In. Then our father. Coffee was made. Toast appeared. Morning moved forward because it always does, even inside families that have just cracked open important things. We went to the store early again. Sunday had a different energy than the clearance day. The urgent edge had eased slightly, replaced by the less cinematic, but more difficult work of continuation. Inventory counts, payment scheduling, follow-up emails, operational cleanup. This is the part people do not imagine when they fantasize about turning points. The turn itself is rarely the hardest part. The hardest part is living in the direction it points. I spent the morning finalizing a 3-week survival plan detailed enough that even my father could not later claim confusion. I color-coded priorities. I assigned dates. I built notes directly into the document so that no one could pretend not to understand the consequences of delay. At 11, I called a brief meeting with my parents and Owen in the office. This is what happens after I leave, I said, sliding printed copies across the desk. My father gave the packet one suspicious glance too many. You make it sound like a military operation. Incompetence already declared war, I said. I'm just organizing the response. Owen snorted into his coffee. My mother rubbed her forehead. Please, I continued. Payroll dates are here. Vendor payments are sequenced here. Tax paperwork deadlines are highlighted here. Customer outreach drafts are here. Category reorder decisions require all 3 of these margin thresholds, or the answer is no. Not maybe later. No. My father flipped through the pages. This is a lot. Yes. Do you think we're idiots? I met his gaze. I think you are people with a long record of improvising around problems until they become emergencies. Owen made a very sudden coughing sound that might have been an attempt not to laugh. My father looked irritated, but to his credit, he did not argue. Then I placed one final page on top of the stack. What's this? My mother asked. Boundary conditions. She frowned. For what? For my involvement. All 3 of them looked at me now. I kept my tone even. If you want continued advice from me after I go back home, these are the terms. My father's mouth tightened immediately. Terms. Yes, terms. I watched him struggle against the instinct to frame boundaries as disrespect. He said, "This is family." "Exactly," I said, "which is why I'm being explicit." My mother picked up the page and read aloud. "No financial requests, no withholding of material information, no last-minute emergencies created by inaction, being labeled urgent unless they are truly urgent. Weekly review call limited to 1 hour. Major financial decisions require written summary in advance." She looked up, stunned. "Written summary?" "Yes. I'm done extracting information through smoke." Owen held out his hand. "Can I see?" My mother handed him the page. Then he smiled. "This is beautiful. It reads like someone finally got tired of being drafted into chaos." "That is exactly what it is." He nodded approvingly. My father dropped into the chair opposite me, with the packet still in his hands. "So if we don't agree to your conditions, what then?" I folded my hands. "Then you proceed without my involvement." The room changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. Because until then, I think some part of them still believed my presence was a permanent resource once activated. That because I had come, and stayed, and helped, and done what I always did, I would continue doing so at the price of my own peace if they simply kept needing me hard enough. But adults with boundaries rearrange old family myths just by existing. Owen spoke first. "She's right." My mother looked at him. "You haven't even read all of it." "I've read enough." My father looked betrayed again, which was becoming almost routine. "You're siding with her on everything." "No," Owen said. "I'm siding with reality on the things reality won." The corner of my mouth moved before I could stop it. My father noticed. "This is not funny." "No," I said, "but it is clarifying." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then muttered, "Fine." My mother looked between us all, then down at the page again. "Fine," she echoed, more softly. It was not a triumph. It was administration. But I had learned to respect administration. Most of life is governed by the unglamorous decisions that keep you from becoming available for preventable harm. By early afternoon, I had done what I could. There was still risk everywhere. Of course there was. I was leaving behind a business that had only just begun telling the truth about itself, and parents who had only just begun telling the truth about me. But staying longer would not transform those things faster. Sometimes the hardest part of being competent is knowing when additional help becomes another form of self-erasure. Around 3, I went into the warehouse one last time to look over the remaining dead stock bundles before uploading the next round. The light coming through the high dusty windows was the color of old paper. Shelves stretched in rows. Boxes marked with category codes. The same squeal of cartwheels from the day before. I was halfway through checking a carton of unsold place card holders when I heard footsteps behind me. My father. He stopped beside the shelf and looked not at me, but at the boxes, as if it were easier to say things in the presence of inventory. "I signed the tax remediation forms," he said. "Good." "And called the landlord?" "Good." He nodded once. Then he said, "I told him you'd prepared the forecast." I looked up. That should not have mattered. And yet. "Why?" I asked. He frowned slightly. "Because you did." Simple, bare, almost confused by the need for explanation. I turned back to the carton in front of me and shut the flaps. A minute later, he said, "I also called the bank contact and told him you'd be copied on future communication if that's all right." I straightened slowly. "That's all right." He shifted his weight. "I should have done that years ago." The sentence moved through me like a quiet current. Not sharp, not healing, just undeniable. "Yes," I said. He nodded again. Then, in the most awkward tone I had ever heard from him, he added, "You're better at this than I was." I looked at him carefully. His face was stiff with the effort of speaking plainly. There was no flourish in it, no attempt to regain control through phrasing. Just a man standing in a warehouse, finally admitting the obvious. "Thank you," I said. His eyes met mine for half a second and then moved away. That was enough. When I finished in the warehouse, I went to the office to collect my laptop bag. Owen was there alone, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. "You okay?" I asked. He looked up. "I think I'm staying in Maple Glen for a while." I paused. "Okay." He laughed softly. "That's all I get?" "What do you want, a parade?" "Maybe just moderate astonishment." "I already used that up." He smiled, then sobered. "I'm serious," he said. "I called the LA project lead this morning. The July thing was fake momentum anyway. Or maybe not fake, but not enough to build a life around. I told him I was unavailable." That surprised me. Not because I thought he should chase the project, because the Owen I knew best had always lived in relation to possibility. Walking away from possibility without a dramatic collapse, forcing it first, was new. "What are you going to do here?" I asked. He looked around the office. "Learn what this business actually is. Help get it stable. Figure out whether there's something real for me to contribute, or whether the honest answer is that I'm better elsewhere. But for once, I'd like to know the answer based on work and not mythology." I was quiet for a moment. "That sounds healthy," I said finally. And he laughed. "I know, it's gross." Then he looked at me more seriously. "I also think Mom and Dad need someone here who isn't you." There it was. The recognition beneath the decision. Because for all the progress of the last week, the gravitational field of our family had not disappeared. If I stayed, I would become center of operations and emotional ballast again. Everyone would start turning toward me automatically. Even in gratitude, especially in gratitude. Owen was offering, perhaps for the first time in his life, to stand in the discomfort himself instead of outsourcing it to the sister who looked strongest. "That means a lot," I said. He nodded once. Then, after a moment, he added, "And I think maybe I owe it." I looked at him. "You do," I said. He accepted that too. When it was time to leave, my mother insisted on walking me to the car. My father came too, hands in his pockets, posture unreadable. Owen carried my bag because apparently growth sometimes looks like practical gestures and not speeches. The late afternoon air was warm, a little sticky. The town looked deceptively peaceful, as if it had not spent the weekend hosting the controlled unraveling of one family's illusions. At the car, my mother hugged me first, not the frantic grip from the first day. Something steadier, sadder, more aware. "Thank you," she said into my shoulder. I stepped back enough to look at her. "I'm not fixed," she said quickly, as if afraid I might mistake gratitude for transformation. "None of this is fixed. I know that." "Good," I said. She nodded. "But I know more than I did." That was probably the best either of us could ask for right then. My father came next. We stood, facing each other for an awkward second before he did something that would have been unimaginable a week earlier. He opened his arms slightly, not wide, not sentimental. An offer, awkwardly framed. I hugged him because I wanted to, not because I was obligated. That distinction mattered to me enough to notice it in real time. His hand rested once against the back of my shoulder and then dropped. "Drive safe," he said. "I will." Then Owen set my bag in the passenger seat and looked at me across the open door. "This isn't the end of the story, is it?" he asked. I thought about the business, about the house, about my mother's apology and my father's admissions, and the drawings in the portfolio and the spreadsheet terms now governing my continued involvement. About the fact that healing, if it came, would come in habits and not declarations. About the daughter I had been and the woman I had become, and the possibility that they might finally be allowed to meet each other without apology. "No," I said, "but it is the end of one version." He smiled at that. "Good," I got in the car and pulled away slowly. There is a particular feeling to leaving the town that formed you after something fundamental has shifted there. The roads look the same. The diners and gas stations and little brick storefronts are all where they were. But your body knows some invisible geometry has changed. A house is no longer just a house. A business is no longer just a business. A family is no longer merely the sum of its habits. Halfway to Hartford, I stopped at a rest area and bought a bad sandwich I only ate half of. Then I sat in the car with the engine off and opened the portfolio on the passenger seat. The watercolor of my grandmother was still there. The rooftop studies, the storefront rendering, my 19-year-old lines, my 17-year-old certainty, my younger self, waiting quietly inside paper all these years like a letter undelivered. I took a photo of the storefront sketch and texted it to Owen. He replied almost immediately, "Better windows. Keep evidence." I smiled. Then, on impulse that felt less like spontaneity than overdue permission, I searched for evening drawing classes in Hartford. Not because I was changing my life in one dramatic gesture, not because I was quitting my job or reinventing my identity or reclaiming lost time with theatrical urgency, just because maybe my life did not need to stay arranged entirely around utility. I found a Thursday night studio session at a community arts center 15 minutes from my apartment. Open figure drawing. Weekly. No portfolio needed. No performance. Just people showing up and making marks in a room. I registered before I could talk myself out of it. Then I sat back and laughed softly alone in the car. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like re-entry. The next week tested all of us. My parents called for the scheduled review, and for once there was a written summary in my inbox ahead of time. Messy, but real. Owen had drafted most of it, which was obvious in the occasional over-designed sentence, but the numbers were there. The vendor follow-up had happened. The landlord conversation had started. Sales were uneven, but not catastrophic. My father had not invented any new debt. My mother had actually canceled 2 purchase orders instead of reconsidering them indefinitely. They sounded tired, more honest, less grand. At one point, my father began to minimize a cash concern, and I said, "Stop editing the problem." There was a pause. Then he said, "Right. Just that. Right. No argument." I ended the call and sat very still afterward, because people do not change all at once. But sometimes, if a story breaks hard enough, they stop being able to hide from the shape of themselves. And sometimes, that is the beginning of something almost like grace. Thursday night, I went to the drawing class. The room smelled like paper, dust, and old radiators. Folding easels, metal stools. Quiet people nodding to each other, without much performance. A woman with silver hair sharpening charcoal sticks with a craft knife. A college student taping down newsprint. A middle-aged man in paint-splattered boots opening a sketch roll with priestly concentration. I took a place by the wall and sat up slowly. My hands trembled a little when I first picked up the charcoal. Not because I had forgotten how. Because memory rushed back too quickly. The body keeps more than the mind admits. When the model took position and the room settled into that particular communal silence of people looking hard at the same thing from different angles, I made the first line. Then another. And for the first time in longer than I want to admit, I was doing something that did not rescue anyone, did not stabilize a system, did not prove my value through usefulness. It was just attention, just line and shadow and proportion, and the private relief of seeing clearly. My name is Charlotte, and all my life I was told to be realistic while other people were allowed to be possible. What no one told me was that realism, when it belongs to you and not to someone else's fear, can be its own kind of freedom. A month later, the business was still standing. Not elegantly, not effortlessly, but standing. The warehouse reset had become a monthly clearance cycle for dead stock. The vendor payments were on a plan. The tax situation was unpleasant but contained. My father had started copying me on financial updates without being asked. My mother had reduced buying and shifted her pride from presentation to survival. which I would not have believed possible before witnessing it. Owen was still in Maple Glen, learning operations, making mistakes, correcting them, and discovering that usefulness feels different when it is earned. One Sunday on our review call, he said, "I think I'm better at editing systems than movies." I said, "No one tell your former self." He laughed. My mother did too. Even my father made a sound that almost passed for amusement. Later that same call, my mother said, "Charlotte had the best idea this week about customer retention. No qualifiers, no at least, no sensible in place of praise. Just the sentence." I did not know what to do with the sudden ache of it, so I said, "Yes, I did." Owen laughed so hard he had to mute himself. And the thing is, that small moment mattered. Not because approval still governed me, because receiving it without shrinking felt new. The family did not become perfect. Let me be very clear about that. My father still slipped into authority when he felt frightened. My mother still confused smoothness with peace when under stress. Owen still had years of underdeveloped practical instincts to make up for. And I still had an almost pathological reflex toward overfunctioning that no single revelation could cure. But the old arrangement was broken. No one could unsee it now. No one could call me only when collapse required it and expect me to arrive without terms. No one could praise my endurance as if it were a naturally occurring resource instead of a skill built under pressure. And I could no longer pretend that being needed was the same thing as being loved well. That distinction changed everything. 6 months later, in early winter, I drove down again for a single day. The store looked different. Still recognizably Wren and Finch. Still warm lighting. Still curated displays. But leaner. Cleaner. Less performative abundance. More intention. The windows really were better too, because Owen and I had convinced my parents to open them visually and reduce clutter. The room could breathe now. It no longer looked like it was trying to prove something frantic. Ava had been promoted. My father asked my opinion on a margin question before making a decision. My mother introduced me to a customer as the one who helped us tell the truth. That sentence nearly undid me right there between the candles and the serving platters. Later, while Owen was in the back handling a shipping issue and my parents were helping a couple choose table linens, I stood for a moment near the front window and looked at the reflection layered over the street outside. I saw the store, the town, myself, not the girl with the sketchbook in the kitchen doorway, not the emergency contact in human form, not the sensible daughter, a woman with her own apartment, her own work, her own art supplies tucked in a drawer by the living room window, a Thursday night class she rarely missed, boundaries, terms, some grief, some joy, a life not built around waiting to be chosen correctly by people who had once mistaken her quietness for lack of need. Owen came up beside me, holding a roll of craft paper. "You look ominously reflective," he said. "I'm observing." "That's worse," I smiled. He leaned against the wall. "You know, Dad asked me last week whether I wanted to take on more formal responsibility here long term." I turned to him. "And?" He shrugged. "I said maybe, but only if we're honest about what I'm good at and what I'm not. And only if it doesn't become some weird redemption fantasy for everyone." I stared at him for a second, then nodded. "That's excellent, actually." "I know. Disgusting. I've become thoughtful." "Try not to overdo it." He grinned. Then, more quietly, he said, "I don't think I'd be here without you." I looked at him carefully. "That may be true," I said, "but staying is on you." He nodded. "I know." Outside, a little girl walked past the storefront window, holding her mother's hand. She stopped to stare at a display of blue glazed bowls and winter greenery, and her face lit with uncomplicated delight. For one brief, strange second, I thought of all the versions of wanting that begin so early in us. Wanting praise, wanting permission, wanting possibility, wanting room. I hoped someone let her keep hers. That evening, before I drove home, my mother handed me a flat paper parcel tied with string. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it later," she said. I did, in my apartment, with the radiator hissing and a bowl of soup cooling on the coffee table. Inside was a framed print of the storefront sketch I had made at 19. They had scanned and enlarged it. The windows bright, the light warm. The building rendered not as it had been, but as I once imagined it might become. Tucked behind the frame was a note in my mother's handwriting. "You saw us more clearly than we let ourselves see you. Thank you for coming back with your eyes open." I sat on my couch holding that note for a long time. Some endings are loud, vindictive, final. This was not that kind of ending. This was quieter. The business did not become an empire. My parents did not become new people overnight. Owen did not transform into a saint of accountability. I did not stop feeling the old sting every time I remembered what had been withheld from me. But they needed me to save the family, and when I came back, I did not save it by surrendering myself again. I saved what I could with truth, terms, and the refusal to confuse love with access. And in doing that, I think I saved something else too. Not my childhood. Not the years already shaped by other people's fear. My future. And if this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe to Bedtime Threads for more long-form stories about family betrayal, quiet revenge, resilience, and the women who were underestimated until the moment everyone needed them.